Bill, your personal story is so inspiring. I was wondering if you would be comfortable sharing a little bit of that personal story with us and how you got into becoming a clinician.
Yeah, you know, it's a funny thing because I think a lot of therapists may have a similar kind of story, but I grew up in a big Irish Catholic family around Chicago, 8 kids, and one of the things was they encouraged you to be independent. So when you were 18, you were supposed to go to work or go to school. I chose to go a long way away from home, and I was a very shy kid. I went from Chicago to Arizona, and I just got lost. And looking back now, I kind of realize it makes more sense, but I didn't know what depression was, and I became very depressed. I was isolated, wasn't eating well, was sleeping all the time, kind of lost my sense of meaning. And I decided I couldn't go on. I was that depressed, I thought about killing myself, and a friend talked me out of it. And then I was stuck. You know, I promised my friend I won't kill myself. I'm here, I'm still depressed, what do I do? So I got interested in psychology and psychotherapy. And in that quest, I came across this very eccentric psychiatrist named Milton Erickson. I was working as a work-study student at Arizona State and the art gallery, and he showed up one day to buy something and to see the art. And I got intrigued with his work, and he had a different approach to things, and it was just what I needed personally, but also professionally. I had been studying psychology and psychotherapy, and it seemed kind of discouraging to me. People were sick and crazy and damaged, and Erickson had an optimistic approach. He was I was from the Midwest, he was from the Midwest, and he was from Wisconsin, I was from Illinois, and I think there's that kind of Midwest work ethic and sort of optimism that comes in the American character, and Erickson was a classic American character in that way. He believed that people could change, and that was something I just held on to when I came across it, and I became fascinated with it. And Erickson wasn't that clear a teacher. He would tell stories or give you experiences, and it inspired me to become a marriage and family therapist because he did sort of systems work. And I want to learn everything I can about how to help people change. So I became interested in change-oriented therapy approaches rather than diagnostic and what's wrong with people kind of approaches. And I became on fire with that. Totally shy guy, I started to speak. Flaky guy who couldn't sit down and write, and I wasn't a good writer. I've written 36 books because I was so on fire with just wanting to let everybody in the world know there's a different way of thinking about people, and people can change, and suffering doesn't have to go on. And I became unabashed, and I think close to psychotically optimistic therapist who believed everybody could change if they got the chance and they were approached in the right way. So I've been on fire for that. You see some of my books behind me here. I've emphasized ones on hypnosis because we're talking about hypnosis, but I've written, co-authored or authored over 36 books. I'm working on my 37th and 38th at the moment, and I've traveled all around the world to teach. And these days, I'm actually really liking doing what we just did, which is doing virtual things, because you can get to so many more people. I mean, what you're doing at your university is amazing. You're putting out this quality material, and people from all over the world who couldn't afford to travel there or couldn't afford to pay for a workshop are getting amazing access to some of the best of what's out there. So I think that we're in, again, a world of possibility, and a world where you can learn. If you're in Kenya and you have a little cell phone and you can get on the web, you can watch your videos and learn something. I think that's amazing. I'm just so excited about this time and this technology.
Well, we're really, really excited that you can be a part of it, and I cannot wait for our learners to see this presentation. A question that we had from our audience earlier was, how do you know when it is appropriate to begin using trance with a client? How long do you practice with that particular client? You know, when do you know that it's right?
I think it's a complicated, there are several answers to that. And when I first went to formal hypnosis training, I learned from Dr. Erickson, then I went to some other workshops and training, but they used to say in those trainings, you have to get the person to trust you in order for you to do hypnosis. I actually, after a couple of years, I thought, no, I'm too frightened to do this because it's such a new approach for me. I have to trust the person to do it. And so I started, when I learned it, I started with the people that I trusted the most in my practice. The people that I liked the best, that I got along with the best. And then I thought, you know, and I said, I don't know what I'm doing. I just learned this. Would you like to try it? And most of them said, yeah, really, hypnosis, interesting. So that's one answer is, you know, start with the people that you're the most comfortable with in your practice. And, you know, I even practice with friends or family members. They were interested, so they let me practice with them. You know, the skills and everything like that. But I think the other answer, another answer is most people wait too long with a new skill. And I think almost all therapy is learning on the job. I mean, you learn the theories and you learn the methods, but ultimately you have to just try it. You have to try it and find out what works. And your clients are your best teachers. I think they'll respond or they won't respond, or they'll tell you, oh, that was weird. I didn't like. There's great learning in on-the-job training, and I think all therapy is on-the-job training. You can learn the basics, and hopefully you should learn them, and you should get your basic skills and whatever licenses you need, and then you learn on the job. So then the third thing is, and I said this in the presentation really is, I usually use trance when the person has tried everything else and it hasn't worked, or when they have a neurological, physiological thing that hasn't yielded to medical treatment. So I've treated, warts, I've treated cluster headaches, migraine headaches, wounds that won't heal, panic attacks that medications haven't affected or helped. Anything that is non-conscious, that is really hard for the person to deliberately make any difference in, even despite their efforts. I think that that's when I typically think about using hypnosis. And I introduce it to them saying, this is a different approach than the old style hypnosis. It's a more gentle, and you'll have a lot of options and possibilities. It won't be me controlling you or anything like that. And most people are like, okay, let's give it a try. And if they're worried for whatever reason, I say, let me just do a couple of minutes, and they go, oh, that's great. I'd like to try that. Once they get a sense of it, and some people have religious concerns about it that are going to open them to demonic possession or influences or satanic influences. And I say, again, old style hypnosis, maybe that's a worry, not with this. You have total control. We're giving you a lot of permission. You never go where you don't want to go. And I think that reassures people a great deal.
What do you do when you have a client that seems overly resistant? Either they are willing, but it just doesn't seem to be happening, or for whatever reason, they just can't relax.
Yeah. Well, first, trance doesn't require relaxation, so I'm not so worried about that, and I just include it. So that's the first answer. You include whatever they perceive or experience as resistance or distractions or barriers to going into trance. But the other thing, then you can get fancy. I guess we didn't really talk about this during the presentation, but you can get fancy. And one of the things, and again, I know because it was sort of how I got introduced to you, Jeff Zeig, Dr. Zeig, has a wonderful tradition that he's uses a lot that I don't use much from Dr. Erickson. The confusion technique. He talks in a way that the conscious mind just cannot follow. Because some people just have a logical conscious mind and they just, like you say, they can't give that up. And you just, here, I'll give you a few minutes of it here. There are various understandings that one gets that when you're a child, that sometime later you have different understandings. So you can understand something and misunderstand it at the same time. And then later, when you have a new understanding, you can misunderstand in a different direction. So you can understand something, and then you can let that go while you cling on to a new understanding. And when you cling on to that new understanding, you can be letting go of an old understanding. So you can understand misunderstandings. You can hang on to misunderstandings. You can hang on to understandings. You can let go of misunderstandings. You can let go of understandings. And you can understand that sometimes letting go is holding on. And you just go on like that for 5 or 10 minutes, almost nobody can follow it. There is logic in there, but it's a weird logic. And the conscious mind, that person who's analyzing things all the time or resistant, they typically go right into trance. And Erickson used that when the person was overly analytical and just couldn't let it go. I think that's a way to go. And sometimes I just say hypnosis isn't right for the person. It's just not the right approach. And, you know, hopefully you have more things in the repertoire than hypnosis, or it's not right now and we'll revisit it later when there's more trust or rapport.
Does any particular scenario where you had especially good results come to mind? Or a client that was very difficult and then you were successful?
I think of a particular situation in which a person came in to me and she said, you know, I haven't been honest with you. I've been telling you stuff and it's certainly been a problem, but I haven't told you the real thing. Okay, well, you tell me. And she started to talk and she couldn't come out with it. And she tried a few times and I said, well, look, you know, maybe you should just not force it, you know, just let yourself sit with it, and when the time is right you can tell me. No, I have to tell you. Okay, well, you can tell me. No, I'm too frightened to tell you. Okay, well, it's okay to be scared and you can tell me. I can't tell you. She kept kind of going back and forth with that ambivalence, I guess. I have to tell you, I can't tell you. I have to tell you, I can't tell you. And we started to do some trance, and I said, and this is where Erickson, I think, was so great, because he wasn't so hooked on having to be logical, and he did this inclusive thing that we talked about, actually. And I just found myself sort of channeling what he would do, and I said, you can find a way to tell me and not tell me at the same time. And I was so surprised. I didn't expect this at all. She went into the trance and her hands just started to do this beautiful dance. It was almost like Tai Chi or those Thailand hand dances where they have the long fingernails. It was so beautiful, I can't even reproduce it. And I was very surprised by that response to me saying, you can tell me and not tell me. And then as this is happening, it's happening for a few minutes, and all of a sudden I just jumped out of my chair when this happened. I was just, what happened there? She didn't seem like anything had happened. She just went back to this. And then at a certain point, she went like this. And she just pushed all down her body, really tense. And then another time, she went like this. She was kind of wrestling with herself, and then back to this movement. This went on for about 5, 6, 7 minutes. And I was just saying facilitative things like, that's right, you can just follow wherever you go and go where is right for you to go. Just general things that would facilitate. And all of a sudden her hands just went back down to her thighs. Big deep breath. She opens her eyes and says, there, you were right. I told you and I didn't tell you. My body told you the whole thing and I didn't say a word. And she said, and I realized why I was so stuck. When I was a child, I was abused, and I hadn't told you that, and that's what I came here to tell you. But she said, I always remember that. I didn't repress or anything. But she said, I didn't remember one aspect. When I went to tell you, I became really terrified that I would tell you this and you would drop over dead. And I knew that was it was crazy. It was just not rational. But I couldn't get myself to tell you because I was afraid something would happen to you if I told you this terrible secret I had. She said, I tried to talk myself into it, but I couldn't. And finally you said, you can tell me and not tell me. During this time when my hands were moving, I remembered the person who had abused me told me if I ever told anybody, he would come and kill the person I told. And I realized that a little child inside me was afraid you would die if I told you this. And she said, somehow you helped me bypass that. And I thought, that is the power of this both inclusion and permission and of the hypnotic approach. You can get to stuff that you could talk till you're blue in the face, and she could talk till she's blue in the face and she wouldn't get to. And I always remember that as one of those moments where I was like, you could have asked me to predict what would have happened when I said that, and I would have never predicted that in a million years. People have this amazing ability to heal if they're given the facilitation and in creative and interesting ways.
And so much of psychology, as you said, focuses on the past that can't be changed, or the pathology that you are coming to work on. However, your solution-focused hypnotherapy, your positive viewpoint on therapy is so powerful. how did you come upon this epiphany of using the person's own resources to create change?
Well, again, I'd like to say that I created it, but I was really inspired by Erickson, who believed that people were resourceful and that they had resources, often ones that they didn't realize they had. He'd say, you know a lot of things you don't know you know that are helpful. And he told me a story one day, which you probably heard, maybe not everybody who's listening to this has heard though, so I'll just take a few minutes to tell you. He was asked to see a woman who was depressed. Erickson used to travel around and teach seminars on hypnosis and psychotherapy. And he was going to Milwaukee, and one of his former patients said, hey, my aunt lives in Milwaukee. She's depressed. She has a lot of money. She's never had any kids, and she's had an illness a couple of years ago. She's been sort of housebound, even though she doesn't have to be. And would you go up and see if you can help her? Because I think she's become so depressed, I'm afraid she's going to kill herself. So Erickson goes there after his lecture. She's in a wheelchair. She has this amazing house with like 10 rooms. She's had elevators put in and ramps put in. She's in a wheelchair, but the world isn't wheelchair accessible. This is the late 50s. And she tells him about how she used to have this active life, and she inherited a lot of money when she was younger, never married, was active in her church and active in her community, but now she stays home. She kind of is embarrassed about being in a wheelchair. She keeps the curtains all drawn, and she shows them all around the house, and finally she gets to the last place, which is her pride and joy. Her greenhouse, her plant nursery is attached to the house, and she loves to grow plants. And Erickson grew up on a farm. He takes an interest in this. He sees that there's these little cuttings on the shelves of the greenhouse, and he says, what are those? She goes, they're all from this one plant, this African violet plant. I've taken cuttings and I've gotten these. And he said, that's really hard to do. You do have an amazing ability. Your nephew is worried about you. He says you're depressed. She said, yeah, I have been rather depressed. He said, I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is you haven't been a very good Christian. Now, this is a little offensive to her because he just met her and he's judging her. He says, no, you used to be active in your church and your community. What I recommend is you get these African violet plants, repot them into gift pots, and when you see an announcement in your church bulletin of a birth, a death, a graduation, an engagement, a happy or sad event in somebody in the congregation's life, you hire a driver to take you over to their house with an African violet plant with your congratulations or condolences. So she says, you're right, I've been sort of wrapped up in myself, I'll try it. 10 years later, 11 years later, she dies. They can't fit the people in the church that want to come to her memorial service, and she's known as the African Violet Queen in Milwaukee. And her life, the end of her life was rich and not depressed. And I was thinking, holy moly, Dr. Erickson, how did you think of that? I'm in graduate school and they're telling me somebody's depressed, I should send them for medications. I should find out what their irrational thinking is. I should find out what the traumas that maybe were part and parcel of the depression. He said, I looked all around her house. Everything looked depressing, except those African violets. It was the only sign of life I could see. And I thought it'd be easier to grow the African violet parts of her life than to weed out the depression. And for me, that was like a billiard ball hitting me, and my whole career went in a different direction. I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to find the African violets in people's lives. I want to find the parts that are working, that have life to them. Yeah, we can explore for years how she got messed up and how her family was judgmental and moralistic and they traumatized her, and how she got sick and then she got isolated and she got depressed. There's a lot there, you know, and that's good stuff to talk about at times. But also, I thought psychotherapy was overbalanced in that direction, and I wanted to balance it in the other direction. Acknowledge the problems and acknowledge the strengths, abilities, and possibilities. And so for me, that was the beginning of a new direction. And a few years later, I coined the term solution-oriented therapy or solution-oriented approach, and I began to write, and as I said, I was on fire about that and couldn't stop. Went all around the world teaching it.
I understand that you sometimes use trance in your own life. Is it safe to do self-induction? And what are some of the applications that you use for clinician self-care?
Yeah, I think that if you know, years ago, there was a student of Dr. Erickson's who became a prominent therapist in his own right, a guy named John Weakland. He worked at the MRI Brief Therapy Clinic and Brief Therapy Institute, and he told me one time something that really made me think. He said, we thought we could just make people's lives problem-free if we just did good enough, and, you know, we had created the best therapy techniques, long enough, good enough therapy. But after 100 years of psychotherapy, we realized that's a utopian dream. You can't make people's lives problem-free with psychotherapy. It's you know, it's just an illusion. You can't do it. But he said, why? Because life is just one damn thing after another. You think you got everything sorted out, life changes, you go into a new developmental stage, you know, your kids go away from home, you leave your job, you lose your job, you get a divorce, you know, you have an illness, something throws you for a loop. And life is just one damn thing after another, and you have to deal with that. And he said, but the problem for people who come into psychotherapy is life has become the same damn thing over and over. And our task in psychotherapy is to get back to one damn thing after another, not to be so stuck. And I think hypnosis, self-hypnosis, for clinicians or for anybody else, is really great when you know, it's not serious enough maybe to go to a therapist and get somebody else to help you, but there's something you've kind of been repeating or stuck on, and you could learn that skill of self-hypnosis, which is not that hard to learn, and move yourself along. I usually use it when I have to function and I'm ill. Like, you know, I taught 3,500 workshops. You know, again, the Midwest work ethic. I never was late. I never missed a workshop. 3,500 all through those years. And, you know, I never, but sometimes I had a cold or I had the flu or, you know, I was jet lagged or whatever. If I felt bad the night before the workshop, I would just lie down in the afternoon before the next day where I had to function, go into my own trance, and just facilitate the immune system kind of clearing things out. That night, I would be racked with fever. You know, it'd be like an amplified infection, and then the next day I'd be fine. So I often would use it for that. Sometimes I use it for other things. I'm kind of a finicky eater. You know, I eat like a 6-year-old a little, and you know, I kind of stuck on that, and I've been to some other people for help, and it's helped a little, but not radically. And I made a trance tape for myself of flexible eating, and that was really helpful, partly because I know this stuff really well, and partly because I certainly trust my own voice. You know, I don't have any resistance to that. It's just me talking with me. So I think it's a nice skill to learn. And also, again, you know, if you go into a lot of trances, it's fairly easy to find your way. It's like going through a path in the, you know, in a meadow or something. After a while, you wear down the path and you can find your way back pretty easily. So doing a lot of trance with other people and then experiencing a lot of trance myself, self-hypnosis became way easier than it was at the beginning when I was trying to get myself into trance. Now I just know how to go there pretty quickly. It's like meditation, I suppose. Once you do it again and again, you know the way there.
And you know your way out.
Absolutely, that's important too. That is important too. Although some people might say I'm always in trance, I'm walking around in trance, but no, I think usually I find my way out. Yeah.
My last question would be, what path or organizations do you recommend for certification? Because obviously hypnosis can be a very valuable tool, but you also need to be very responsible with it because it can be used to be detrimental. So what is the way to know that you're training and you know, you're representing yourself?
Here's the thing, the state of, you know, it's like a little like coaching. The state of hypnotherapy or hypnosis certification is kind of fragmented. There are, you know, 2 or 3 organizations that do it. Some are lay hypnotists, you know, certified hypnotherapists. You see CHT behind people. That's people who don't have degrees typically, who, you know, are just going out there helping people stop smoking or lose weight. And I'm a little wary of those. I think, you know, they don't have the professional liability, qualifications, licenses. So I wouldn't go in that direction typically. The American Society for Clinical Hypnosis has their own certification, but it's not recognized in most states. It sometimes translates in California where you are. There, some of those qualifications can help you get, you know, recognized with your license with that. In Florida, there's also another licensing law that requires, and some of the ASCH things will meet that criteria. But There's a national board of clinical hypnotherapists in Silver Springs, Maryland. Ron Klein runs that. And so again, I like that organization because I like Ron. And so that's the certification side. Most states don't have it. Most countries don't have an official certification. So you do it under your license and you just make sure you get good training. So that's the second part of it, getting good training. And where do you get it? Again, I have a little bias towards the Ericksonian side of things because I don't like that you will, you know, that directive stuff. It worries me a little for philosophical and theoretical reasons. And so Jeff Zeig and the Erickson Foundation have a 2-week and sometimes a 3-week intensive training. They do it a couple times a year with Jeff and Lillian Borges and Brent Geary. They do really intensive supervision and training, so that's a good one. Michael Yapko does some good training. He's in the San Diego area, but he travels around a lot. He's written a few books about trance. Steve Gilligan does a thing called self-relations and generative coaching, and that's very trance related. He does a trance camp for, again, 2 or 3 weeks in the San Diego area. He's in Encinitas, California, and that is a really immersive experience. I do an online course on Ericksonian hypnosis, and when I first was asked to do an online course, I mean, you and I just talked about this, I was like, you can't teach hypnosis online, can you? And we did a test. I did a 3-day intensive training, and I tested people, or quizzed people before, how much we're using hypnosis, how much do you know? At the end, how much you're using it, how much you know? And we did the same thing with an 8-week online course. People were using it from the online course way more, and what they told me was, I can go over the material again and again, which is, again, the value of you putting this out on the web, is people can go over it again and again, and sometimes when you're in a live thing, it comes at you and you miss 90% of it, maybe 80% of it, 50% of it, however much you miss, and you don't have a chance to practice, then ask any questions and come back. So I have an online course where people can practice with each other over the web, Skype, or nearby if they can make a connection live. And they get to go over this, and then I give them supervision on the phone and case consultation, and on the web I give them feedback on that stuff. So they can find out about that by going to thenewhypnosis.com. They'll get on my mailing list. They'll get a free guide to why hypnosis has nothing to do with suggestion and what it's all about. And then I'll follow up with them about once a year. I offer that course. So I think that there's this worry that if you're too positive in psychotherapy, you'll miss where people are suffering and they're stuck and they don't feel positive. So for me, successful change work, including hypnotherapy, stands on 2 legs. One is acknowledging where people are and their suffering and their stuckness and the problems, and joining them right there. It's the best of Carl Rogers, where he was just with them with unconditional positive regard, no judgments, you're just there with them, join them. And the other leg is invitation to new possibilities. So I call this acknowledgement and possibility. And I think you have to balance those, and it's not a it's not an equal balance, because sometimes people need a little more acknowledgement and joining, and sometimes people need a little more invitation out of the stuck place they are. So it's a dynamic dance on those 2 legs, and I think that is, what I've noticed about all successful psychotherapies. Good at joining, good at inviting, acknowledging, and opening possibilities. There's this conference that the Erickson Foundation organizes, and it's like the Woodstock of psychotherapy. It's called the Evolution of Psychotherapy. It happens usually every 5 years, sometimes a little different schedule. And I went to that conference, and a couple of things happened for me. One is, I agree with everybody. All the major faculty, I was like, yeah, that's it, that's great. And I realized there's such diversity of theories and opinions, and they're all sort of right. I mean, probably problems have multifactorial causes. They're economic, they're cognitive, they're affective, they're neurological, they're physiological, they're family related, they're trauma related, they're systems related, they're environmental, they're economic. There's just a whole bunch, they're biological. There's just a whole bunch of stuff that probably goes into making it. And some people focus on one aspect of that, and they probably can get to a solution that way. After going to that conference, and also this kind of bias that I got from studying with Erickson, is I started to think there's a bunch of explanations for how people get there. But what's really important is how do we help them move on? So I started to distinguish between explanation-oriented therapies and solution-oriented therapies, the ones that are helping people move on. And I'm sort of thinking, I once saw a t-shirt, I'm big on t-shirts, and I once saw a t-shirt at some fair that I was at and said, I've given up on my search for truth and I'm now just looking for a good fantasy. And I think in therapy theories, they're all good fantasies. That is, they're all interesting conceptions. None of them are totally true. They all probably have a slice of the truth, like the blind man touching the elephant. They all have a piece of it. But what really makes a difference at the end of the day is, what do you do to make a difference? So I started to lean towards the solution-oriented things. The second thing I realized being at those conferences, every one of the top experts in psychotherapy tells a great story. That's how they hook you in. You're sitting there and you're going, I don't know, and then they tell a story and you're like, yes. They're all good storytellers, and maybe that's how they got to the top. And I've just have been fascinated with stories in my, in the years since I met Dr. Erickson, who was such a great storyteller and used stories as an integral part, something I never learned in my graduate studies about being a psychotherapist. They never told me to tell stories. It never was mentioned. And Erickson, it was such an integral part of what he did. And these presenters, I mean, when you teach, you should tell stories. It makes things come alive, I think. But these experts in psychotherapy, they'd come up with a big story that they had been able to tell people, and people believed that story. Everything is cognitive, and that's why you have problems. That's a great story. It's not true. It's a great story. And then they would come up with great case examples to illustrate, and you think, yeah, that's the way it is. And that's what I was saying. I'd go from presentation to presentation, and I'd be agreeing with all of them, partly because they were so persuasive and they were great storytellers. So for me, I sort of went back to the basics, which is learn to tell a good story and you can create change.